So, since Tony and I went on our epic whiskey week last week, I figured that this week would be an excellent week to teach you a little bit about bourbon and what all we learned while we were there. We went to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 distilleries, including Jack Daniels. You see the single barrel sitting over there. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about what it means to be a bourbon. There are several indicators that tell that your whiskey is in fact a bourbon. One, you have to be made from at least 51% corn. Two, you have to be aged in charred white oak barrels for no less than 2 years, and that gives us our nice brown coloring. In fact, in the late 1700s, a man named Elijah Craig had a barn fire, and the barrels that he was aging his whiskey in actually caught fire a little bit, but the barrels were not wasted. And so he said, well, let me just go on and distill my whiskey and put it in the barrels and see what happens. So on their 6-month journey down to New Orleans, they aged in this charred oak barrel, and they turned a nice brown color. Not this brown, because these have been aged at least 10 to 12 years. All of these are single barrel or small batch bourbons. So when it got down to Louisiana, lo and behold, they pop it open, and oh my gosh, this whiskey has got this nice dark brown color, and it's a lot smoother on the palate, and people enjoyed it a lot more. So because Elijah Craig lived in Bourbon County, Kentucky, they said, hey, we want this Bourbon County whiskey that's been coming down the Mississippi River and has this awesome brown color and this really smooth, amazing, oaky taste to it. So they shipped it back, and much to Elijah's surprise, he was like, oh my gosh, I can start distilling this for real. I'll char the barrels to begin with instead of letting it be an accident. So that's what he did. And they shortened the name from that whiskey from Bourbon County to bourbon. And then they just added and subtracted over the years and tested and experimented, and they came up with all these awesome kinds. So what I've got is I've got Four Roses small batch, Maker's Mark. It's also a small batch, and I hand dipped that nice red on there. Woodford Reserve, Blanton's single barrel, Town Branch, which is actually a new bourbon, more like a craft bourbon than anything, but me and Tony thought it tasted really good, and it'd be really good for mixing. I've got Wild Turkey Rare Breed, which is a single barrel, small batch. Behind that, I've got Willet Pot Still Reserve, which was a craft distillery, and it was an amazing 12-year-old bourbon. We've got Jack Daniels, which is not technically a bourbon. It went through all the processes. It's 51% or more corn. It's been aged 2 years or more in a white oak barrel. The barrels were charred, and it is made in America. But Jack Daniels takes an extra step, and they add a charcoal mellowing process. It goes through 10 feet of extra charcoal, so they can't technically call it a bourbon. But until that step, Jack Daniels is a bourbon. Real quick here, if you'll look at the Basil Hayden bottle, you see that it says Kentucky Straight Bourbon Whiskey. All of these are whiskeys because they're made from grains. In order to be called a bourbon whiskey, you have to have the 4 steps I told you. At least 51% corn, 2 years or more in a white oak barrel. The barrel has to be charred. It has to be made in America. To be straight bourbon whiskey, you have to have no additives. You can't add anything for color, taste, and you can't lower the proof after it's all done and put in the bottle with water. You have to do the lowering of the proof before you put it in the bottle. And finally, to be a Kentucky straight bourbon whiskey, you have to be distilled in Kentucky. So I hope you enjoyed that little lesson on bourbon. Since I'm running almost out of my 4 minutes, I'm going to bid you adieu with one final swipe of the bourbons. Oh, and add an Evan Williams single barrel from 1997 in there, and it is amazing.